Welcome back to another episode of War in Cali. In this episode, I'm going to detail the story of a Fruittown Brim member named Joe Jones. Joe was born Joseph Jones III and was born on July 3rd, 1987 at Gardena Memorial Hospital. Joe would come from a long line of gangbangers. His grandpa was one of the leaders of the Businessmen, a black gang of the 1950s and 1960s. Joe's grandpa would later die in 1973 in Folsom Prison after balloons that he swallowed containing drugs erupted in his stomach, causing his death. Joe would even have several family members claiming for a Gangster crib. Joe's father, Joseph Jones Jr., was born in 1950 in a housing project in Boyle Heights. His family later moved to Compton, where he joined the Pirus. Joe's father would later attend Centennial High School, where several Bloods and Pirus from nearby areas would go. Joe's father ended up doing nearly 5 years in prison for drug offenses and hijacking trucks. By 1985, Joe's father would meet his mother, Carla, in an unlikely spot, the Roxbury Recreation Center in Beverly Hills. They were both a part of a program called New Beginnings, which helped adults with drug problems. Joe's parents would break up when he was around 2 years old, and after this, he would barely have a relationship with his dad growing up. Joe would actually start being around the Fruittown Brim's hood when he was around 11 years old, and he started looking at them as another family. Joe put his faith in the Brims, and with the Crips being the main rivals to the Brims, Joe had to prove himself daily. Being such a big kid, it was usual for Joe to get jumped by his rivals. The Fruittown Brims and the other Brims they're connected to, being the Van Ness Gangster Brims and the Harbor Park Brims, went to war with several Crips. Going into his early teenage years, Joe began to act out. In 2000, Joe was sent to Juvenile Hall for assaulting a middle school teacher. He claimed he only lightly pushed her aside, and for this incident, he received a 1-year sentence. But he only would serve 8 months. But all going to jail would do was make him a better gang member. He got more confidence, and his mind started crossing over to the evil side. On February 21st, 2001, on a winter night, 13-year-old Joe called a party line where he would get into it with several gangbangers. But he would later get in contact with a female, and she wanted to hook up. Joe made a mistake by giving her his address. Joe, with blood from the Fruittown Brims, didn't know the girl was recruited by the Rolling 30 Crips to find out where he lived. Shortly after 9 p.m., in Joe's mother's Inglewood apartment, there was a knock on the door. He opened the door and saw a young Crip. The young Rolling 30 Crip would immediately start shooting Joe. Joe would be shot in the head, the arm, the shoulder blade, and the back. The shooting did leave Joe blind in his left eye and deaf in his left ear. He was determined to change his life after this and started going to school after he lived. While going to school, Joe's teacher would give him high praise for attending school and passing all his classes. But just 4 months after he was left for dead, the streets called again, and Joe went back to the streets. Joe started banging again with a renewed dedication, fighting, and getting revenge on his enemies. His reputation grew, and he was going around bragging about putting in work on the Rolling 30 Crips who shot him. Joe's new reputation had him on the kill list for several Rolling 30 Crips. They would get his number and even call him talking about killing him. Then on the night after Christmas in 2002, Joe walked out of an alley on 35th Street, and Rolling 30 Hall and Crips drove by and fired multiple shots. Around 8 p.m., Joe and another Brim were walking through an alley and headed to a bus stop after they just got done smoking weed and drinking. They were headed south to 35th Street, and a car drove by. Joe heard them yell, "Harlem 30s," then multiple shots was fired, and by the second shot, Joe was sprinting for cover, and by the fourth, he was laid out on an elderly woman's front lawn. She called 911, and the paramedics were on their way. Joe was once again shot in the head and was in a coma. He barely survived after 3 weeks. After being released from the hospital, Joe would say he got caught slipping by the 30s, and that's what comes with the game, and being shot can happen to anybody. After a month recovering, Joe was back in the streets, and Joe hung out among many reputable names in his hood, like Little Stretch Dog, G Active, Killa Crafty, Telly, Big Killa Dirt, which he got his name from, Baby Killa Dirt. But Joe would go to jail shortly after this over a crazy carjacking, where he was said to rob a man at gunpoint for a Benz, which he was later caught for, and this got him a year in jail. Joe had a lot of crazy experiences, from being shot multiple times on separate occasions to jail. There's not much info on Joe's life after this point, but you can see what he went through as a young kid and how crazy his life was. This will conclude this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you check out my previous episodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.